Hi everyone, welcome to the Tech for Good live show. My name is Tom Raftery with SAP, and with me on the show today I've got my special guest, my co-host Gary. Gary, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you so much, Tom. Gary Connelly is my name. I'm founder of Host in Ireland. I suppose I've started a few companies that I've worked. I've started a few companies that didn't.
Sounds familiar.
Certainly a digital optimist, ultimately, and I'm really delighted, Tom, to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And we've got Peter in the comments already saying that he can hear us breathing before we went live. I was on mute, so I'm going to blame Gary for that one.
Oh my God, that's a great start.
We have some excellent stories lined up, folks. So we'll head straight in because, as I say, Pat Lynch from Cork, Siva Kumar, good morning, and I presume that's Tom and Gary. Hi, Siva Kumar. So, as I say, we've got loads of great stories today. We're starting off, as we typically do on the Tech for Good show, we start off with a climate-based story. And Tom and Gary, thanks, Siva Kumar. Good morning, Tom and Gary from Davin. Davin's there as well. Excellent. Good man, Davin. Good to see you. Nice to have you back. So first story is a climate-based story, and while the headline doesn't call it out specifically, I'm putting this up because many of us will be aware that tomorrow Joe Biden will be the 46th, I think it is, president of the US, and he has said specifically that one of his first actions on day one will be to bring the US back into the Paris Climate Agreement. And, that's huge. There's a lot of other stuff he's going to do as well. He's talked up a big climate program that he wants to institute, apparently, and I've seen it reported in a couple of places, that the Keystone XL pipeline is going to be shut down as well. I've not seen that confirmed anywhere. I would hope that would be the case, but we'll have to wait and see on that one. But very first day, and John Kerry is there as his climate czar, very first day, bringing the US back into the Paris Climate Accord is huge, and I think that's going to be massive. Not just for the US, but for the globe, for the planet. We need the US in there because the US is such a big emitter, and having them outside of the Paris Accord would not be good. What do you think there, Gary?
Just for the tone and just for the messaging, it's so important that, as you rightly say, we're all one part of one little rock, and having a big part of it just not participating, and just in general to give some impetus to the dark days of where we are in the pandemic. It's something to look forward to, isn't it? I see also he wants to come back into WHO as well. So there's some good stuff, not just climate, but also in some societal stuff. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's great. And Siva, don't worry about the typo. He's saying sorry about the typo there in the comments. Don't worry about the typo, Siva. And Regina,
we're 2 Irish, man. We can barely read. You're fine. You're fine.
I'll throw the comments up there just for a second. Regindra is saying hooray about Biden. I'm guessing, and Davin saying good to see you. Thanks, Davin. Yeah. So back to the stories, and the next ones that we're going to talk about are in the health space, because there was some really interesting stories come out of there in the last week. The first one, and this is from a Twitter thread that was put out by Eric, and I'm going to screw up the pronunciation of Eric's surname, but he's a doctor, Eric Feigelding, or something similar, and he has this great Twitter thread. And again, just like last week, I'm going to follow this live stream up with these slides in a PDF, including links to the stories where they came from. So the link to this Twitter thread will be in the slides when I publish them. But it's fantastic. He's talking about using the technology that was developed for the COVID vaccine, the mRNA vaccine technology, is going to be used again and again and again because it's such a fantastic delivery mechanism. It's going to be reused for other diseases. And one of the first ones they're talking about there is an experimental one for multiple sclerosis. And like I say, this is a Twitter thread where he goes down through it in a long thread of tweets, he being a doctor, and he goes into way more detail than I could take in, but or understand. But and he's linked there as well to the scientific paper, the science publication where they talk about it. So, I mean, lots and lots of people in the world suffering from multiple sclerosis, and the ability of this to halt the progression of it and possibly even reverse some of the effects of it are amazing. And for me, you know, multiple sclerosis is an autoimmune disease, and one of my kids has type 1 diabetes, which is also an autoimmune disease. So I'm hoping that if they can do MS, which is autoimmune, maybe there's a possibility of something happening for diabetes as well. But even if not, just that alone, the multiple sclerosis is great. And they're looking at ones for cancer and other uses of mRNA vaccines as well. So, you know, it's a huge, huge, huge story.
You know, when I read that, Tom, one of the extraordinary things about it was that when you get deep into that thread, is that once again, it reinforces the fact that they're collaborating with each other. So the success of COVID-19 and the collaboration and the sharing of information and intel, they obviously realized in the pharmaceutical sector what we've probably known a lot outside it for a while, that if you achieve so much more when you're collaborating. But also, it's extraordinary. It also brought me onto another place where polio, wild polio, is only gone from Africa since 2020. It was one of the great achievements of the 2020. And I then did a cross-reference because I said, okay, well, when did it leave Europe or Ireland? 36 years ago. 36 years. And
that's before I was born, obviously. But yeah,
before your hat was born, that's for sure. Anyway. But the sense you get is that with this acceleration and this co-opetition and this collaboration is that there's a possibility that we won't have such big lags. In
that kind of cooperation is always there in science. That's the way science works. I'm a graduate scientist, so I participated in some of this research back in the day, not on vaccines. I'm a plant scientist, so I was doing botanical work. But publishing papers, the whole idea of publishing a paper in a peer-reviewed journal is you publish everything that you've done. So you tell everyone exactly how to reproduce what it is you did. You tell everyone the results you got, and the idea is that then they take that instruction set and try and reproduce it. And if they can reproduce it, then great, what you've said is proven true. If they find a fault or if they can't reproduce it, then there's something wrong and your results are called into question. So that's how science works. Raghu saying hi, Tom and Gary. Hi, Raghu. Sorry, I should be looking here. Hi, Raghu. Let me switch screens again to make it easier to check the comments. Davin saying you wish. Lost the context there, Davin. Oh, the 30 years. What do you mean? What do you mean?
We're working in multiples of 30 here on this show.
Oh, dear. We'll go on to the next story. So smart watches. Yeah, I thought this was really interesting. And again, the link for this will be in the notes when I release them. The smartwatches, and it's not just the Apple Watch. This talks about two different studies that was done by Mount Sinai and Stanford, where they took the heart rates, the resting heart rates of people using Apple Watches, Garmin's, and Fitbits, and they were able to find variability in heart rate, presumably down to, I think they mentioned inflammation, variability in heart rate, which was consistent with COVID before clinical, 7 days before it could be detected using clinical methods, but using tests, or 7 days before any symptoms came on as well, or any fever. So 7 days before it comes on, you can detect it in changes in people's heartbeat. I thought that was spectacular. There's no mention in the articles of anything being done yet with that in terms of producing an application that can monitor heart rate or anything. But, just the fact that it is feasible is pretty amazing.
I had a snoop around, Tom, the CES website last week, what was coming out. And what was really interesting was the use of the word smart. They're reducing the use of the word smart because maybe it's a state of certain people's geographic in their minds is that more and more people are seeing the word smart on a meter in their house or on their wrist as some sort of a tracking device. And they actually are now starting to go against the word smart. So I'm not sure what the next iteration is, but one of the paragraphs was that they're branding the watch a name rather than a smartwatch. I thought it was interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And looking at some of the comments here as well, Davin is saying that, and I saw this report as well, Davin. It was came out of the head of the head of the World Health Organization, whose name I can't remember, Tedros something long. But he was saying that it was horrific. There was a moral catastrophe happening, that so many millions of vaccines had been already given out in developed countries, and only 25 vaccines, not 25,000, not 25 million, only 25 vaccines had been given out in low income countries. You know, I mean, right there, that's pretty horrible. And Peter is saying, here's my disruptive thought on curing certain illnesses and providing a remedy. If the cure means saving lives, they're mostly all over it. If it is a remedy, well, there are billions and billions to be made. No need for a cure. Yeah, that's always a tough one, Peter. I mean, I see it myself. As I said, my son has diabetes, and you always wonder, there's a lot of money being made on, keeping people who have diabetes, and particularly type 1, who have to inject insulin, 4, 5, 6 times a day, is there a financial incentive there to cure it? If you cure it, then that lifetime purchase of insulin goes away. But if you don't cure it and just produce insulin, then, you've got a customer for life. So, and that's probably a very cynical attitude. And I think here in Europe, most governments heavily subsidize insulin, because it means that you either have people, if you don't subsidize the insulin, you have people who are very sick and unproductive, and they cost a lot to keep alive and in healthcare. If you do subsidize the insulin, then suddenly these people are no longer sick, they're no longer taking up hospital beds, they're highly productive, and they're contributing to the economy. So, when you do those kind of maths, it works out, far better for the economy to subsidize the medicine for them. And in that case, it might even be more economically beneficial yet again to subsidize a cure. And so I don't know, but, I naively like to hope that that's the case.
So a lot of it's like the same origins of why we've got fresh water and good sewers. Is societies found that everybody was sick all the time. They couldn't get up and get to work. It's when you've got commercial interests, scientific interests, and societal interests. We'll be nice to the pharma companies today, because they've come up at a rapid fire with the vaccine. So
indeed,
today should be a good day for vaccines.
True.
Just for the next 10 minutes, maybe.
Yeah, and I saw this story coming out of Australia, and I thought it was pretty cool. We've heard in the past, lots of stories about drones helping people out in situations. You see ones where drones drop life jackets to people in the water, and ones. I mean, there was a couple of stories out of Ireland during the lockdown about the Mana Aero drones being used to deliver groceries and medicines to people to elderly people who are self-isolating and things like that. But this one is a slightly different take on it. This is a story of a family who went on a trip in Australia, kind of in the outback, and they forded a river, and they kept going, and they were going to ford the next river. But as they got to the next river, it had gotten so deep from floods that they couldn't ford it. So they went to turn back, and the previous river they had already forded had started to swell as well, and they couldn't go through that. So they were stuck. And they were in a place where there was no cell coverage. So, yeah, and this was 4 adults and a 6-month-old baby. So one of the adults obviously had access to a drone. So what does he do? He gets the drone, he sticks a phone onto the drone. There's no cellular coverage, as I say, but he types out a text message and hits send hoping that if he sends the drone up high enough, it'll get to line of sight of a cellular tower, and it'll keep trying to send until it sees a tower, and when it sees a tower, it'll send. And sure enough, he sent the drone up, it got into line of sight of a tower, the SMS went out, search party came and rescued them. And I thought that was pretty cool. And it's particularly relevant for me because I treated myself to a little drone for Christmas. So I got myself a little DJI Mini 2 drone. It's a cool little device, and I've had a bit of fun playing with that. And the other thing that I put in here, because they mention in the article that drones have saved 500 people so far, and I followed the link to see where that would take me. And it was a link to a DJI site. DJI are the manufacturers of some of those drones. And right here, you can see they now have 532 lives they attribute to being saved by drones. And you can click on any of the circles there to see who was saved how. And if you go into the one in Australia, there's only 4 listed there in the circle for Australia. If you click on that, the story in the previous slide isn't referenced, so the 4 there don't include the 5 lives, so that 532 should actually be 537 at this point. So it's amazing. And these drone rescues mapped, they take those stories, and this is, as I say, this is the DJI website, but they're taking stories from social media, and they don't care whether it's a DJI drone or any other manufacturer. So there's some incredible stories in there.
What I thought was interesting there was the 2 high-tech pieces of kit, a drone and a smartphone.
Yeah.
Both dumb until the logic was applied by the human. So for those that are often thinking that humans are going to be replaced by an awful lot of technology kit, another example of where the actual logic, the execution of the plan had to come from the human. And I think that's what differentiates us often from machines.
Fair
is
point.
to take an environment that you have to actually. I don't think a drone would have come up with that, or a robot. Maybe I'll be told. Somebody will type in now, Sean. But I just thought that was what I took away from it. It still needed a human to apply the logic, which was super.
Yeah, no, yeah, and it worked well. As I said, there was 5 of them there, including a 6-month-old baby saved. The transportation space, lots going on there, obviously. Peter's just slapping you on the back there, Gary. Great point. It took the human to do it. So, slightly related to drones, I think. Archer Automotive, based out of California, are getting together with Fiat Chrysler to build drones big enough to carry people. Flying taxis, EVTOL flying taxis, where EVTOL is electric vertical takeoff and landing. So this is part of a trend, because we've already seen, I think it was last year, Uber Elevate did a deal with Hyundai, where Uber Elevate would come up with the design for the drone, and they'd hand it off to Hyundai to do the manufacturing. And this sounds like something similar. Archer coming up with the design, and they'll hand it off to Fiat, who've got these big plants for making cars, to manufacture the drones. The design is apparently capable of traveling 60 miles. So what's that, 100 kilometers at something like 250 kilometers an hour. 250 kilometers is about 150 miles an hour, thereabouts, that kind of ballpark, carrying 4 people. I mentioned Uber Elevate. I should follow that up by saying that Uber Elevate was wound, well, it wasn't wound down, it was sold off. Last year, at the end of last year, Uber started to shed some of their other arms, because they lost so much money in the pandemic when people weren't taking Ubers. So they decided to concentrate back down. And Uber Elevate, the drone division, the drone taxi division of Uber, was sold to Joby Aviation, who are a startup out of California as well. Joby are they're quiet. A bit like Zoox was before Amazon swooped in and bought them out. Joby have had some incredibly big investments. I mean, I think the last round of investment was led by Toyota, and they netted 550 million. So, remember that name, Joby Aviation. They're obviously going places, and they've no shortage of money.
Do you think on that though, Tom? The flying cars and flying this and flying have been around for a while. Technology is one thing, but legislation to allow them to be used is a whole different ballgame.
And these companies are reaching out to various states and municipalities to get licenses to test their technology. So it is going to happen, and in fact, these flying taxis, the drones, they will typically take off from the likes of heliports on the top of tall buildings, rather than they won't be at street level. And it'll be for traveling across cities quickly or going to an airport quickly, that kind of thing. Uber had plans for building drone ports in cities. Now, you can imagine, and they had the idea of multi-story drone ports with ports coming out the side of the building, and you'd go into the building and out onto the drone port and take off and go. And the idea would be you get from city center to an airport in 10-15 minutes, whereas in the car it would take you an hour and a half depending on traffic. Now, maybe if everyone's going in drones, you'd be faster going in the car. I don't know. There's a bit of that too, but one of the things these kind of things like the drone taxis, flying cars, they're bumping up temporarily against the shift to autonomous cars. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens where, when, because autonomous cars are going to happen as well. Which will happen first, I think, will very much depend on the cities, to a certain extent on the regulation. But, I was in Bangalore last year, and, autonomous cars trying to navigate Bangalore would be a hell of an achievement. Whereas getting an autonomous car to, drive around parts of Arizona, for example, is trivial. It's already happening with Waymo, have their autonomous taxis already driving around there. So, there's those kinds of challenges around dynamic environments, which are less of an issue for flying taxis. So I could see flying taxis take off, if you'll pardon the horrendous pun, take off in the likes of Bangalore far faster than autonomous cars. Whereas, the converse of that is I could see in many European and American cities, autonomous cars rolling out before the autonomous or flying taxis take off.
So that old saying will still prevail, that the future is here already. It's just not evenly distributed.
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah.
William Gibson, great quote. Yeah. So
I was going to attribute to you, but hey, if it's somebody, okay.
I couldn't take credit for that.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Michelle is patting you on the back there as well for that thought.
Thank you, Michelle.
And that's a whole different kind of traffic jam. I assume that's related to Bangalore. Yeah. Moving on from that, I saw this one. I thought it was really interesting. I was looking at the Bloomberg New Energy site and their electric vehicle dashboard for 2020. And it showed that the sale of fully electric buses globally is now at around 33% of new bus sales. Now that's for 2020. This data from Transport and Environment comes from 2019. But you can see the huge difference between these European countries in terms of the amount of electric versus hydrogen versus hybrid versus diesel versus gas buses. I'm based in Spain. You can see Spain has one of the highest rollouts of gas buses. You see a lot of natural gas buses rolling around Seville here, where I'm based, for example. I'm Irish. Gary, you're based in Ireland, and you can see Ireland is doing abysmally. This is data for the number of bus sales in the year 2019, and of 184 buses purchased in Ireland, almost all of them were diesel, and there was a couple of hybrids thrown in there to kind of greenwash it. I mean, that's horrendous. But then you look at Denmark, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, even Sweden, and they're all blue, not entirely blue, but almost all blue. So a massive number of electric buses happening there. 78% of them in Sweden, for example, 67 Luxembourg, 66 in the Netherlands. So it depends enormously. Sorry?
Going back to your previous autonomization and stuff, surely buses, while we're on them, buses and haulage and stuff will be an obvious for the autonomization, because the bus goes in pretty much the same route.
True.
Would that be one of the first that they will be? Sorry to jump back to the previous, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. No, you make a very good point. Yeah, it would. Buses are a great candidate for it, and I've seen some prototypes around already. The very first autonomous vehicles are already in operation. I'm not talking about the Waymo taxis. Even before those, in places where you are kind of geofenced or geobound, places like mines where you've got excavation vehicles which are fully autonomous, for example, and ports as well, where you've got these kind of trucks for moving the containers around. And even in warehouses, you've got these little autonomous robots moving goods around within a warehouse. But those are bound, geofenced areas where you don't have a dynamic environment. Buses, for carrying people, it's more of a dynamic environment, but still quite static. They just have to watch out for things like pedestrians and cyclists and other vehicles on the road. So yeah, that will be one of the first. To go back to your earlier point, regulations will have to change to allow it to happen, and there will need to be a lot of testing, because obviously a bus carries a lot more passengers than a car, for example. So it needs to be more safe. What have we got in the comments there? That's a whole different kind of traffic. At least you're on the chart. Oh, right, okay. At least Ireland and Spain are on the chart, yeah. And Nordic 7. Say again? At the end, Ireland's at the very beginning, unfortunately. Yeah, and Creeker is saying Nordics have embraced electric urban buses. They really have. They really have. And it's a huge change it makes to a city when the buses there are fully electric, because it's not just the tailpipe emissions and the CO2 that you're doing away with, but it's also the noise. The noise that you get from diesel buses is huge, whereas the noise you get from electric buses is, they're not silent, not fully silent, but it's far less than the noise of a diesel bus going by. What else have we got here in the comments? This is great. People are jumping in. Autonomous transportation, I must say, leaves my comfort zone, right? Yeah, their cybersecurity will need to be the best in the world, and they'll still be hackable. Where there's a will, there's a way. Yeah, that's a good point, Peter. And that is something that, will have to be heavily worked on. And for reasons like that, it will be a while before things like buses are autonomous. What was that movie with Sandra Bullock where Speed? Yeah, we don't want a Speed kind of situation. Runaway bus in a city centre. Marta Munoz Mendez Villamil, I think I'm pronouncing it. How is that chart likely to change with current EU and national regulations looking at reducing CO2 emissions, social and environmental requirements for public investment, etc.? It's a great question, Martha. So as I said, this chart is from 2019. It will have changed enormously in 2020 and 2021. In fact, the figures for Germany, and you can see Germany there, is at 6% in 2019. By 2020, I don't know what the figure is for 2020, but it will be, significantly more than that, because in 2020, Germany enacted legislation to finance 80% of the cost of electric buses. So any municipality that was looking at getting electric buses, they were suddenly given 80% of the upfront cost of the bus by the government. So that number has probably gone up an order of magnitude. It's probably at 60 or 70% for 2020. And you're right, the year 2020 in Europe, there was laws passed around the amount of CO2 that manufacturers are allowed to have averaged over their fleet, which will have a significant impact as well. But the biggest impact, Martha, is cost, because electric buses cost about 20 cent per kilometre over their lifetime to drive, whereas diesel ones cost about 75, which is why globally they're now at 33% of new bus sales, and that figure is going to go up really quickly. And the same will happen with fleet vehicles, delivery vans, all that kind of thing, for exactly the same reasons. It's not so much the regulation, it's more the fleet managers saving costs by going electric instead of diesel. Roberto, hi Roberto, welcome to the show. Roberto had reached out to me earlier. In the Netherlands, many local governments surprisingly still said diesel buses as a mandatory requirement for any mobility provider participating in EU tenders. Wow, seriously? That's horrendous. I had no idea. I'm really sad to hear. That won't stay that way for long. That's the only thing I would take away from that. I don't see that being the case for much longer. We'll hit into energy and the energy space and some of the cool things that are going on there. This story, Gary, you brought this one to my attention. Vind-O, the world's first energy island. Basically, this is an artificial island which is being built 100 kilometers off the Danish shore for aggregating the energy from offshore wind farms. The idea being that on this island you would have things like HV, high voltage DC infrastructure to allow transmission of the energy from the wind farms. They're looking at initially connecting 3 gigawatts of wind farms. A gigawatt is roughly the output of a nuclear reactor. So roughly right now they will have access to about 3 gigawatts of wind, and they want to scale it up to about 10 gigawatts. And they want to do things like have power to X, so to be able to take in the surplus energy coming from those wind farms and store it either in hydrogen or in chemicals or in like ammonia or something, or hydrogen or something like that, and then ship that off. So lots of cool things happening there. Gary, you talked to this one because you brought this.
I just thought it's so cool because it's a collaboration of so many different technologies. Yep. You know, and we're used to, and again, words do matter. And in that article, it started to talk about a power to X rig, because we're used to oil rigs. So we should be getting used to new terminology for a power to X rig. Nice. That's exactly what it does. And it also has accommodation for people to live on, helipads, a data center, which is no reason why not. And I just thought that it brought so many of these technologies that to most people are out there, like you said it there, when the wind is blowing, but we don't need any more electricity, turn it into a gas, store it. And I just thought it was excellent. And then they linked it into the Danish ports that will be servicing it will have to change their commerce. The whole commerce of that port will change as a supply to these islands. But the term I took away was a power to X rig. You heard it here first.
And the other cool takeaway that I got from it was that this is being funded by 2 of Denmark's largest pension funds and Denmark's largest utility company, Andel. So, you know, I have a podcast coming out tomorrow on my Climate 21 podcast with a guy called Paul O'Connor, who heads up debt capitalized markets, ESG debt capitalized markets for JP Morgan. And this is something, you know, I know absolutely nothing about finance. So I learned a huge amount talking to Paul for this podcast. And he talks about why money is running away from carbon intensive products and services and running into things like this, you know, and that's how you got these 2 large pension funds jumping at financing this, and other big projects like this are now having no problem getting funded, whereas ones like coal and gas plants are going to find it increasingly difficult. So catch up that Climate 21 podcast. Plug.
This is only your Tuesday job, is it?
Exactly. What have we got in the comments there? Let's see. Peter's saying, I'm all for electric vehicles. We also need to improve the electrical infrastructure to support the charging that will be required. That's a myth. Had a Tesla startup beside me yesterday at a local grocery store, and to hear the electric whining starting up was quite frankly glorious. Yeah, it is. Still nothing better than a naturally aspirated F1 car, though. I disagree on 2 things there, Peter. The first is, I was at the Formula E finale in New York last year. Not last year, the year before now, because last year was 2020. In 2019, in July 2019, the Formula E finale. And going outside this, arriving outside the stadium and hearing the cars screaming inside, the Formula E electric race cars, and the screaming sounded like the TIE fighters in Star Wars, and it was such a beautiful sound compared to, for me, the sound of a Formula One. It just ruptures my eardrums. It grinds on me. I hate it, but that's a personal preference. As for electric vehicles needing to change the grid, that's, as I say, that's a myth. That's not an issue. If you look at the amount of energy that electric vehicles require and when they charge, and there are several studies out around this. National Grid have a great one, for example. In fact, National Grid, the UK National Grid companies, when the UK government said that they wanted to phase out the sale of internal combustion engine vehicles in 2040, National Grid said, no, make it 2035 or make it 2030. It's not going to bother us. We don't care. So they see no problems with it. So from an infrastructure perspective, there's no issue with them. I have an electric vehicle. I plug it in at nighttime. Sometimes I plug it in a day when the sun is shining and it's not being used, because we've got solar panels. But if I plug it in at nighttime, I plug it into a standard wall plug. 2-pin, 220 volt, 220. We're in Europe, so it's 220. But standard plug. Normal plug, and it draws 2 kilowatts, which is the same as a hairdryer. If your grid can't stand a couple of people turning on hairdryers at the same time, you've got bigger issues. Roberto, accurate crowd management in most bus fleets, trains still missing or underdeveloped despite so much IoT ML power available. Opportunity for growing. Yeah, very, very true. Martha, Peter, agree large parts of Spain, for example, lack the electric infrastructure for these vehicles to recharge when necessary. That's a good point. That's a very good point, Martha. There's need for investment commitment to improve these basic infrastructures in the first place. So I actually saw an article in the Financial Times in December, Martha, talking about here in Spain, and it said that Spain has 1/5 the number of public chargers for cars than the European average. It's horrendous. 1/5 of the European average. So Spain is an edge case, but that will improve. You have to hope that the funds that are coming to the countries in Europe for the pandemic recovery would include requirement for promoting green fleets, for example. So I see that improving quite quickly, hopefully. Not heard that in person yet. Not sure what we're referring to there, Peter. Gary, any ideas there?
No, but one point to make for Peter is that in parts of the US where they had a high concentration of electric vehicles, they had to insist that they had a manufactured noise to simulate. So maybe you could get a hack there, Peter, and put in the Formula One noise when you buy your Tesla.
Someone can. If I remember rightly, when you buy the Porsche Taycan, if you pay an extra €500, you can get the sound. You can get an MP3 sound, and you can choose different sounds to have coming out of your cars. Crazy,
well, anyway. There you go. I mean, how about that? That's like non-alcoholic beer. What's the point?
I know, yeah. Davin saying, if and when they race motorsport again, come out with me, Peter. I'm on 15. Okay, very good. There you go. Jonathan, I think EV is definitely part of the solution, but the reality of rural distribution networks and the old urban is that there's capacity issues as there's no diversity in EV charging. So I think that's overstated, Jonathan, because the vast majority of new EVs come with a range of between 400 and 500 kilometers. You'd have to be very, very, very rural and isolated in kind of the outback of Australia before you were 400 or 500 kilometers from the nearest charger, I would suspect. That's I think that's overstated. As I say, I plug my car into the normal 2-pin plug. I have a charger as well, which will draw, 7 kilowatts into it at a time. But the 2-pin one is fine. It's more than I need. So that's not an issue.
Is it behavior as well, Tom? I mean, where there's change and adversity, there's behavior, and change in behavior. Sometimes we run away from it rather than embracing it. So. I know in Ireland now we've just brought in legislation whereby people can become prosumers.
All right.
So effectively we can put solar panels on our roofs, and if there's excess, we can sell it or contra it. Well, that's got more people excited about saving the planet in Ireland than any amount of carbon figures, because they can make a few quid.
Oh dear God.
But one of the things that was discussed, which is quite extraordinary, is that if you aggregate all the electrical cars being charged overnight when they don't need it, that they can the grid will draw electricity off your battery to prop up parts. And once you have a fully charged battery at 7 or whatever your profile is, do you care?
Exactly. So yeah, that's using smart charging and using basically the cars as a virtual power plant, and that's something that is going to happen as well. We're not quite there with the technology yet. It's not that it's hard to do, it's just you need cars with bi-directional charging capabilities, which they're not being built typically with that today. There's only a few that have that. My Leaf does, by the way. But you also need bi-directional inverters in your home, which very few of them are, very bi-directional chargers.
Are you an influencer, Tom? Are you being paid by Leaf to plug their product? Are you like one of these influencers with product placement and all?
No. In full disclosure, I get nothing from anybody. So no, not at all.
This lady, this has to be an Irish person, Claire Dooley. She's informing us all that Tesla supposedly have a farting noise for the car.
They do. It's very funny. And so two things on the sounds there, because Peter and Davin are talking about the sounds of the Formula E cars. And I think Peter was saying he hasn't heard that sound. Well, go to YouTube and just type in Formula E or Instagram either, because they have a channel on Instagram where they show some of the races, but they're on YouTube as well. And you can hear the sound there. Like I say, it sounds like the Star Wars TIE Fighters. It's a beautiful, beautiful sound. I started to tear up as I was outside the stadium hearing that sound. I really did.
I might be wrong, but am I right in saying that Formula One cars are also electric in some capacity?
They're starting to, I think, allow some electric component in them. I'm not entirely sure, but it's not the Formula E are fully electric. There's no fuel used at all, and they're fully carbon negative as well, or carbon zero, I should say. They net out all their emissions over the thing. The Tesla fart noise, yeah. Again, there's loads of videos of people doing that. So people sitting in their car and making that external, so people passing by, they suddenly hear this fart sound, but they're turning around. It's very, very funny. It's great to see a company like Tesla with a sense of humor, putting out products like that. Most countries still don't have enough renewable energy sources to charge all of these EVs to call it green. I disagree, Camilla. If you look at the European grids, at least, I'm not sure where you're based, the European grids at least are getting more and more green. I think it was like 60% of the energy in 2020 in Europe came from renewable resources. And a story that we had on the show last week was that the American Energy Information Administration published the details for the new energy that's being built out in the US in 2021, and of that 39% was going to come from solar, 31% was going to come from wind, so that's 70%. Another 4% was going to come from batteries, so that's 74%, and there was something else as well, but anyway, 74%. Oh, nuclear. Did I mention nuclear? Anyway, over 70% of the new energy build in the US in 2021 will be from non-carbon generating sources. So, and that's only going to increase as time goes by, because, again, what I talked about earlier, funding for gas and coal is going to become harder and harder, whereas funding for the clean energy is going to be easier and easier to get. So that's not going to be an issue. Davin, I'm pretty positive I'm not mature enough. Okay. I've seen it on TV. Okay. Formula One is dual energy for years now. There you go. That's answering you, Gary. Years now. Mervyn, I'm not sure where you're getting that. Most EVs are green, and they're getting greener. In fact, internal combustion engine vehicles get worse over their lifetime because the parts start to wear out and they start to become more polluting, whereas EVs get greener over their lifetime because the grids they're connected to get greener over their lifetime, something internal combustion engine cars can't do.
But there's a lot of talk about the lithium-ion batteries and the cobalt and that type of stuff. Is that possibly where that gent is coming from.
Possibly, but again, lithium-ion batteries. So the batteries in cars are not like the batteries in your laptop and your phone. You know, the batteries in your phone, you're used to that, the battery life diminishing after 2-3 years, whereas the batteries in cars, there are studies showing that the Tesla batteries last, 300,000 to 500,000 kilometers, and at that point, they've lost 10% of their original capacity. And it's because the battery makes up such a large component of the vehicle that it's coddled. It's completely coddled. So, there's a whole battery management system that manages the charging and the discharging of the battery to make sure that it doesn't get damaged and to maximize its lifetime. So the batteries last forever. They last longer than the body of the car. The Nissan CEO came out with the results of 10 years of producing EVs. Nissan have been producing them for 10 years now, and they're saying that apart from the first generation Leaf, which did have battery issues, but all the Leafs since then and their new Arias, which are coming out this year, the batteries there, the data shows that they will last 10 years longer than the expected lifetime of the body of the car. So that that's a non-issue essentially. Okay, we're still getting conversations happening here, so we'll pull back to that. I'm not sure what Kerr's was regenerative braking in F1, I think. Oh, right, okay. So regenerative braking in F1. I love watching All Motorsports. It's a great show. Wheeler Deals, where they did an electric car restore and the acceleration is intense. Yeah. There's some incredible ones. What about the environmental consequences of sourcing the lithium needed for EVs? Yeah, so lithium is one of the most abundant elements on the planet. How it is sourced is, that's down to regulations, but there shouldn't be any problem sourcing it. There's lithium resources in Portugal, for example, that they're talking about mining now. And of course, that would be under EU regulations. Australia is going to become a huge source of lithium, and they have rock lithium there. There are issues with sourcing the lithium, for example, in some parts of South America, where it's from brine, kind of salty lithium water as opposed to from rock, and that can affect things like the water table and runoff and things like that. So there are those kinds of issues with lithium, but the rock lithium, very little problems with that. Lithium recycling centers, yeah, that's very good, Martha. That's true. Of course, if your lithium-ion batteries go for 500,000 kilometers, it'll be a long time before you have a lot of batteries to do any recycling with. Having said that, there are huge problems with recycling lithium-ion batteries, not from cars, but from the laptops and from the phones and from the tablets that I mentioned earlier, because they don't have those battery management systems and those batteries do die after 2 or 3 years. So yes, there can be problems with lithium, but it's not in the cars. The problem with lithium comes from the other devices that use lithium-ion batteries, where the lithium-ion batteries are not properly managed. So yeah, and we do need recycling for that. It's a very good point. Jonathan, I think the ID3 was the first car to be carbon neutral on the forecourt. That's true. There is a lack of clarity from manufacturers on the footprint of the manufacturing process. There actually isn't, and most of them have to publish that. And in fact, Volvo came out with a very good transparency report a week or two ago. I don't know if I have a copy of it, but if you Google Volvo life cycle analysis, battery electric vehicles, you'll probably find it very quickly. There's a lot of very good studies of life cycle analysis of vehicles, and the most recent ones show that after an electric vehicle has done more than 16,000 kilometers, it has already made up for its carbon footprint and overtaken it, and that's based on using standard electricity from the European grid, the average carbon intensity of the European grid, whereas in my case, for example, I typically take it off the solar panels and my electricity provider is 100% renewable, which is kind of choices that some people do have, and that way you can, if you do have an electric vehicle, bring your emissions down even more. Peter, they will last longer than the 70s Pinto with the exploding rear end impact. Yes, yeah, there was a good film about that, wasn't there? I seem to remember. Claire, loved the program, learned loads, great. I'm Scottish. There you go, Gary, Scottish. My husband's from a Thai. Wow, the husband's from a Thai.
Nice.
He's invented WTP equipment to reduce aeration in wastewater by up to 50%, better treatment and compliance, but water utilities more interested in solar panels when ASB can substantially reduce energy and CO2. ROI under 2 years, cutting away energy is creating clean. Oh dear, I'm sorry to hear that, Claire. That sounds like a phenomenal invention. Possibly one way to help him sell that, Claire, would be if he could, and maybe he's thought of this already, but if he could figure out how much the carbon savings are in terms of carbon credits, because a lot of municipalities who are dealing with water utilities are interested in getting carbon credits. That may be a path to market. Mervyn, sorry, Mervyn, didn't mean to jump on you. Don't worry about it. Really enjoying the show. Always a learning opportunity. Great. Camilla, electricitymap.org/map. I'm based in the UK and currently we use 33% of renewables. And that number, that 33%, will increase. If you look at the amount of coal in the UK grid, actually there's a great, I saw a great link during the week to the changing elements of the UK grid over the last 10 years or 15 years or something. And it's impressive the way the renewables have gone up and up and up, wind in particular. Luis Maria Portilla. Hello, everyone. Hi, Luis. How are you doing? We've only got a few minutes left. We've got like 6 minutes left. I'm gonna let you know as well, folks, that I recognized last week, greetings from Madrid. Hola, Madrid. I'm in Sevilla. I noticed last week that the comments got cut off after an hour. So in 6 minutes or so, the comments will stop feeding through, I suspect. Let's see if we go back to the stories. Dubai, this is amazing. Dubai are building a solar park. It's built already. I think they've had about 1 gigawatt of generation there from solar already, and they're using that to start powering aluminium production. And that's amazing because we talked about transportation, and yes, transportation is a big problem. It's got a huge carbon footprint, but so does cement manufacture. So does smelting aluminium, or aluminum as they call it in the US. And that's really hard to address, and yet it looks like there in Dubai, they've got a solar park that is now powering aluminium production, which is incredible. I
had a look at that, Tom, to give some context, and a kilogram, would you believe, of wood to produce is between 3 and 7 megajoules. Steel is between 30 and 50 megajoules. Whoa. Aluminium, 227 to 340 megajoules.
Jeepers.
To make 1 kilogram.
Yeah.
So that's why it matters.
Exactly.
We talk about these things and we say, oh yeah, well, what's that? But when you look at it like that, because aluminium definitely, when you look at it from a strength, diversity, flexibility, is probably going to be a metal of the future. It's not going to be one of the past. So that's why that matters, that particular item. It's
amazing.
20 times more than iron and 8 times more than steel.
Yeah. No, and we typically burn rocks. In other words, coke coal to burn rocks, bauxite to produce aluminium, which makes no sense. So getting it from solar is incredible. Martha is asking there about the Climate 21 session tomorrow. So Martha, that's my Climate 21 podcast. Basically, you can go to any podcast application. If you listen to podcasts on a podcast application and just type in Climate 21 and you'll find it. The interview with Paul will go live at 6 a.m. CET tomorrow morning. Alternatively, it's at www.climate21podcast.com because, I've no imagination, and also that works nicely for search engine optimization. So climate21podcast.com, or go to any podcast app and just search Climate 21 and up it'll come. And she's also said, muchas gracias, de nada, de nada. I used to build induction furnaces for melting aluminium. It's a very power hungry process. Yeah. In fact, a lot of the global aluminium production is done in Iceland because they've 100% renewable and some of the cheapest energy in the world. I think it's something like 30 or 40% of the energy in Iceland comes from geothermal and the rest comes from hydro.
Yeah.
Google. Oh.
This is a good one.
Yeah, Google's looking to replace diesel generators in its data centers with batteries. That's amazing. And they're starting with a project in Belgium. And you can see this is a picture of the Belgian data center that they have. It's a small enough data center, so it's a good place to try it out. Joe Cava is their head of data centers. And he's quoted in the article about it. And they want to try and use batteries, as I say, instead of diesel generators. They use diesel generators as backup power in case there's an outage on the grid. Typically in a data center, you have the data center, and the data center has power coming in both sides of the building, two different supplies in case somebody cuts one cable, it'll pull energy from the other cable. But if there's an outage beyond that, the power goes down, then they have a bank of batteries, which it pulls energy from immediately, and then diesel generators to kick in, because it takes the diesel generators a couple of seconds to kick in. So that's what the batteries are for. And then the diesel generators feed in there to keep the data center up and running. Yeah. But what Google are hoping to do is do away with the diesel generators altogether and just have enough batteries to run the data center on batteries. And with the cost of batteries coming down and their energy density going up, that should be entirely doable. I don't see any issues with that.
There's there's a number of very interesting byproducts also, is that when you consider that data and the centers are going to go right out into your municipalities, right out to the edge, as they say, like a box on the side of your street. You can't have a big dirty diesel generator sitting beside a street. So the whole technology is connected. And one of the questions in there is, as well as this, on the other side, what Microsoft are doing is they're doing fuel cells.
Correct.
They're using
Martha mentioned that in the comments too.
She said it in the comments. But the ultimate goal here is, and I know, Tom, you're acutely aware of it, is that everybody should be like a smart participant in a grid. Because if you have a grid, and it feeds into a lot of what people are saying, if you have a grid that's solar and wind, well, guess what? You must have storage, some capacity, whether that's batteries, whether it's hydrogen, combustible, whatever. This is Microsoft and Google's also plan, is that they will have all these batteries sitting behind the meter available to kick in and like be this prosumer idea.
True.
Or a happy citizen, I think they're called a grid citizen. So that's it's really interesting to see these developments.
Indeed. Davin's got to run. See you, Davin. Ireland is now permitting dual fuel electricity and gas connections for data centers. If there's a story to tell with green hydro and backup.
What that is effectively, as the grid gets built out and as we decarbonize the grid to 70% by 2030, to be able to give a secure grid connection, the energy grid supplier, EirGrid, are insisting that we'll give you the grid connection, but you also need to have a on-site gen to be able to act as our fallback in the event that we need to call upon it. So it's really flex grid. It's the start of prosumers, where you've got somebody who's both taking and giving, balancing the grid. Otherwise, and you said it early also, we've had our money point, which is our big coal generating, turned off. We've also we've turned off our peat generating, right? All these high carbon emissions. But as a transitionary stock fossil fuel, and we do need a transitionary combustible fossil fuel, it looks like for this decade at least, it'll be natural gas.
Yeah. But, again, that's not going to have a long lifetime, so I wouldn't be investing a lot of money in that if I was a utility.
No.
Peter and Mervyn are talking about heading off, and Davin as well, I suppose, to the Supply Chain Now live stream. I didn't realize that was on Tuesday. It's usually Monday and Thursday. Oh dear, I have competition. Peter at least has it loaded in 2 tabs. Good man, Peter. 1 earbud in either ear, listening on both sides, I'm guessing. We gotta go. We gotta put less stories in this, I think, because we'll never get through them all. And I think the comments are probably going to run out pretty soon, because the comments shut down at the top of the hour last week. Although I saw Jonathan's one just came in there again. GNI are also supplying a data center in Meath. Is that Gas Networks Ireland? With gas as a backup instead of diesel. Okay.
Yeah.
This story I'm putting up now is, again, it's about generators, but in this case, it's about something called tailgating, which is something I'd never heard of before I came across this story. Apparently, it's a US thing where you go to a big game, a big football game or the like, in your truck, or you go and your friend has brought their truck, and you have a diesel generator on the back which powers a fridge and powers a TV and powers, various things. And I think I can't remember the number. I think it was like 120,000 pounds of CO2 that each game gives off in terms of just the emissions from the diesel generators. And I did some calculations and figured that that's about 55,000 kilos of CO2. So about 55 tons of CO2 per game per stadium. How many stadiums in the US by how many games a year? So these students in a university came up with a battery alternative to this, and they've set up a company and they've gotten funding. I think it's called Electrion or something. I thought it was a really cool story. Peter's off. See you, Peter. Have a great rest of your week. I thought it was a really cool story, and phenomenal innovation from a group of kids. Kids know they're university students. I shouldn't call them kids, but between that and the story we had earlier, it talks to the younger generations and coming up with some phenomenal ideas.
And more to the point, they saw the need, but the cost of entry to do prototypes, etc., is so low now that they were able to get it off the ground. That's distinct to 1,000 years ago when Tom and you and I were trying to get things. You'd have to get a white coat and you'd have to be in Bell Labs to get access to the bits and bobs. So it's not just wonderful, so fantastic.
Yeah. We'll go into privacy and we'll get through these quickly because we're well past the hour at this point, and I think the comments are about to shut off if they haven't already. Nope, we got one through from Mervyn. Thanks for your insights. Thanks, Mervyn. Enjoy Supply Chain Now. I might see you there in a few minutes. Duckduckgo. So for anyone who's not familiar, Duckduckgo is a search engine like Google, like Bing, that unlike Google, Duckduckgo doesn't track its users. It doesn't track your searches. You don't have to log in and create a profile. It doesn't keep any of the data. And it doesn't give different results to different people, which is one of the things Google does. Depending on where you are and who you are, you get different sets of results. DuckDuckGo gives everybody the same set of results, no matter who they are or where they are, and it doesn't track its users. And in fact, it is the default search engine on my main browser. I use it quite a lot. I still use Bing from time to time when I'm not using DuckDuckGo. If the results from DuckDuckGo, for example, aren't as good as I'd like, then I'll drop back to Bing, and if that fails, I might even go to Google very, very, very occasionally. But I trust Microsoft more than I trust Google, and I trust DuckDuckGo for searching more than I trust Microsoft. So that's kind of my order of things. But they recently surpassed, I think it was 2 Mondays ago, they surpassed 100 million daily search queries for the first time. So this speaks to the fact that people are getting more conscious, I think, of their privacy and of how their data is being monetized and used against them.
Absolutely. And last year they said the top date was in and around the election dates when people started getting more and more mindful.
Yeah. Martha's dropped off as well. I'm not sure there's anyone left. We're talking to ourselves, but at least the live stream, while people may not be watching it live, stays on LinkedIn, and people, I get comments coming up on this in my LinkedIn for days afterwards with people going, "Hi Tom," and it's like, no, the thing was a couple of days ago. You missed it. You're just seeing a recording.
And I think this one is another example, like those university guys,
Yeah.
that the tools are available with a web browser. This young boy, Gregory Tarr, entered into the what we call the Young Scientists, the Irish Young Scientists. You may know some of the previous winners, the Collison brothers who head up Stripe. And this dude basically looked at and worked out an algorithm for deep fake. And if you're not familiar with deep fake, it's effectively where Donald Trump isn't Donald Trump and the Queen isn't the Queen. When you're looking at a video, to the eye, it looks absolutely. And he came up with an algorithm, and it's important to note that it was 10 times faster. It was 10 times more accurate than the best products in the market right now. And he won. And I guess, it's a far stretch from probably the entrance when I was in school, where it was taking an enzyme out of an apple or something. This is just phenomenal that a young boy at 17 has the tools available to him via a browser to develop this. That to me is just awesome. When you and I off air were talking about sort of low orbital satellites and what that'll do for access, amongst other things, for young boys and girls in Mali and places like that. When they have access to it, it's just incredible what they can explore. He won it with this, as I say, it's a deep fake analyzer. It's 10 times cheaper and 10 times more accurate. Incredible. Fantastic.
Amazing.
What a great story.
And Pat Lynch has just dropped off as well. See you, Pat. Thanks for sticking around. And miscellaneous stories, we got a couple of them as well. Shower power, that's you, Gary. Go for it. That's a Kickstarter.
The actual concept of a Bluetooth powered hydro speaker in your shower actually didn't appeal to me. It's fine and grand, but I just thought the concept of all the running water on all the devices we have in our house can be used as a mini hydro, not just in your shower. When you turn on any, here you have it. It's a Kickstarter winner. It's a shower Bluetooth, but we all have running water. So this is basically where they've got a little tiny hydro inside it. Great to see that nearly on every tap feeding into something, a battery or something. And it all adds up. That's what I thought was just the technology to sync to the app.
No, it's great. And I remember seeing a few years ago now, I think it was a water utility in Philadelphia in the US, putting turbines into their pipes because, like most water, it's gravity fed. So they were able to put turbines in and generate almost enough electricity from the turbines in their large pipes to cover a lot of their electricity costs. So, that speaks very much to your point, because all of the water in all of our houses uses gravity feed. So yeah, it could easily turn little mini turbines.
Did you have a bike?
Sorry?
Did you have a bike when you were a kid?
Yeah.
Yeah, and you had a dynamo on the wheel.
Yeah.
Whatever happened to dynamos? I mean, that was just, when you think back at it, it was way before its time.
It was, and you were lighting up an incandescent bulb. You'd need far less energy now, because they used to, when you put the dynamo on the wheel, you felt that you had to cycle that much harder, whereas now you could do it with LEDs, which don't need nearly as much power.
Yeah.
Devin has got a comment there. Hi guys, some great convos going on. Big fan of renewable green energy and conservation of our limited resource in the planet. Likewise, Devin, very much so. I'm working with a company, datatechnics.com. Have a look, some great technology on proactively monitoring leakages in water and gas pipes. Oh, very cool. Utilities all over the world are wasting too much energy and resources. Very true. Happy to share some more info. Excellent. I'll have a look at that. Yes, Tom, we still have to meet for Survey Santapas in Seville. Love it. And look forward to that too. We are, I think, on the last story. Yeah, last story. Total, the French energy company, the French oil and gas company, Total. It's one of three big European ones, BP and Shell being the other two, who announced in 2020 that they were going to go to net zero emissions. Now, depending on how you measure that and stuff, we'll see how they get on. But Total announced as well that they were going to leave organizations that lobbied lobbied against climate legislation. And one of the big ones is API, which is the American Petroleum Institute. And in in the API's annual event last year, their CEO, whose name escapes me, came out and said that he would, and it was at the end of the year after the election, so he knew Biden was coming in, and he said he would work tooth and nail to fight against Biden's climate policies, particularly around transportation and pipelines and things like that. So that was the last straw for Total, and they said, okay, we're out. We are no longer being part of this organization, which is fantastic. And you know what? Kudos to them, and let's hope that the other two European oil companies, Shell and BP, do similar. And on that, I did mention the Climate 21 podcast before. One of my guests on one of the earlier editions of the podcast was Hubert Vigevno, who is on the executive board of Shell. And I'm hoping to have guests from another couple of large European oil and gas companies on the Climate 21 podcast in the coming weeks and months. So I will be putting this question about API to them if they come on. So look out for that.
Fantastic.
And there's a question from Claire asking us if we have seen the movie The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind. I think that's the movie about the kid in Africa, this village in Africa, who built a wind turbine out of spare parts and bicycle bits and things like that. I haven't seen it. I've read about it, if that's the one I'm thinking of. But yeah, I will look for it because it's a really inspiring story.
Sounds like a modern day Eat the Peach, right?
True.
Where he builds it out of bits and pieces. But great. Thank you so much. I will check it out.
Yeah, very good, Claire. Okay, so I think, Gary, we've finished the stories for today. We've gone well over time because I wouldn't shut up.
I think the questions were wonderful. I think
we had some great questions. I think the audience got really engaged, and that was fantastic.
Yeah.
I love seeing that.
That's what it's all about.
And Claire's come back and said one to watch. Yes, so obviously it's the correct one. I wonder, Claire, do you know, is it on Netflix or is it on Amazon or any of those? Or anyway, if you know, drop it in the comments there, Claire.
Go into Duckduckgo and Google it.
There you go. Perfect. I'll do that. Yeah, I shouldn't be pushing the work back out to Claire.
That's one of your other endorsements. That's one of your other products. You are an influencer. I'm definitely going to check.
do and make it your default and try it for a while.
I will.
Okay, so that's it, guys. We've come to the end of the stories. So thanks everyone for your attention and your interest. Okay, we've seen it. Must be so great. I'll check it out. I'll find it. Thanks, Claire. Thanks everyone for your attention, your interest, and we will be back next week, same time. So it is Tuesday afternoons, European time. Here in Europe, we start at 5 p.m. CET. That is 4 p.m. CET. Sorry, that's 4 p.m. Ireland and UK. And then it is starting 11 a.m. US, 8 a.m. Pacific, and I think you can work out other time zones from there. So thanks again, everyone, for your interest and attention, and we shall see you all. Wait a sec, Claire's a question. Is Duckduckgo from kids game Duck Duck Goose? I have no idea. I'm not familiar with a kids game called Duck Duck Goose, so I don't know. Any ideas there, Gary?
Duckduckgo, and remember it well. They go around in circles. Maybe. I have no idea. But let's pretend that it is. Let's pretend it is another scoop from Tom's show.
Wish it was.
All right.
Had to deal with
Thanks
stuff.
a million. Thanks,
So
everybody.
to deal with the work stuff. Okay, cool. Well, Davin, you came back just in time for us to sign off. I'm sorry. But the bits you missed are in the recording. And as I said, folks, I will post the slides. I will edit the header of this post with a link to the slides when I post the slides. So I'll do that probably tomorrow morning. Okay, have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you all back here same time next week.
Bye, everybody.